teenagers. Today we are talking about Teen Week. We're going to discuss everything teen related. We've done a lot on parenting, which tends to sort of go toward younger kids. But let's talk about teens this week.
Oh, my goodness. One of the hardest times of my life was being a teenager.
Yeah, me too.
And I am grateful that my parents did not kill me. And
It's funny, my mom always talks about me being a great teenager, and yet I remember it as being a very hard time in my life. So
before we get to that,
Yeah.
let's read one of the podcast reviews. We love it if you would leave a review and tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like, because we're always trying to make this better, and we're sort of in it for the long run.
Yeah.
I think, we're 350 podcasts. We have 3.5 million downloads, which we're really excited. Thank you so much. This is from Jim on Tana's YouTube channel. Dear Tana, you and your husband, Dr. Daniel Amen, that's me, have helped me in weight loss and mind balance by keeping a peace of mind. Your
Love that.
words are gold.
I love that.
Thank you so much.
I love that.
So what we wanted to do in Teen Week is, if you're going to parent teens, one of the most important things you need to do is remember what it was like for you when you were a teenager.
It's hard.
When your brain was not fully formed, right? The prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until you're in your mid to late 20s. And your psychological tasks. So you have all of this biology happening, hormones raging, new relationships, and you're going through the psychological tasks of independence and identity.
Right.
I want to be in charge of my life,
Right.
even though my brain isn't developed,
Right.
which
And who
can
am I?
lead to some
Right.
wacko decisions. And who am I?
Right.
Separate
From you.
from you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard. That actually will begin to lead to some very painful moments
No.
for the child and
No, for
for
the parent.
the parents. So I worked, I know you did,
Mm-hmm.
as a teenager, and I went to school, although I wasn't very serious about the whole thing. I was much more serious about working girls.
You were more serious about working girls or working the girls?
Sort of both.
Let's not say you were serious about working girls. That just did not sound
Work.
right at all.
I was serious about work. I worked in my dad's grocery store,
Yeah.
and I spent a lot of time doing that, and I was good at it.
Yeah.
And I liked girls way more than chemistry or
Right.
geometry. Or
So you were a normal boy.
I was a normal boy, and I also loved football, which actually did not love me back.
Right.
Because I think of the times I got whacked. And it was hard. My dad sold his business. So he had a chain of grocery stores, S&A Foods, and he's a very successful business person. And then Arden Mayfair, which was a big food company, bought his stores. But my dad is very independent, right? Growing up, his favorite words that I remember were bullshit and no. And so he found quickly that he could not work for someone else.
Right.
There was a lot
That
of
sounds like my mom.
there was
They
a
have a lot
lot
of
of
similarities.
bullshit and no in my
Right.
house. And I'm a teenager at the time. So he is stressed. My mom is always stressed because she has 5 daughters and 2 sons. And so I felt sort of invisible
Lost.
and not connected to either of my parents, but especially not my dad. So we ended up butting heads a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a great time, because I think there was sort of a lack of connection. And it culminated when I turned 18. There was still a draft going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go sign up for the draft. And I had a low draft number, which meant I was probably going to be drafted. And I decided to join, and he told me I couldn't do it.
Which meant
Because
you
there
were
was a
absolutely
war
going to do
on.
it.
But because we didn't have a relationship, as he said, I couldn't do it. That meant, well, I absolutely had to do it. And 3 weeks later, I have my head shaved. I'm at Fort Ord in Northern California with people screaming at me that I was a maggot. And I'm like, how did I go from a job, car, girls, to being a maggot?
Right.
Right. It was sort of a series of decisions, which actually turned out to be really good for me.
Right.
Because I say the Army is the ultimate good mother.
Right.
Because, when you do the right things, they reward you, they promote you, they give you more money. And when you do the wrong things, they thump you.
They whack you. Right.
Consistently, unemotionally,
Right.
every time.
Right.
And
Discipline is consistent.
So I ended up coming out of the Army way more grown up. If I would have started college when I was 18, I would not have gone to medical school because I
Right.
would not have done as well.
Right.
And in the Army, I got really a sense of purpose, discipline, and I had 3 more years of brain development so that when I went to college,
Right.
I was a star because I could apply myself better. So many kids, when they go to college just straight out of high school, they don't do nearly as well because their brain is not as finished, if you will. So that's a little bit about my journey. What about yours?
So mine is very different, and yet we have some parallels. Most of our listeners know that I grew up with a lot of trauma, drama, chaos, whatever, single working mom, but who actually had a couple marriages. So I had 2 stepdads. One was a really bad guy, and the other one was an interesting guy. I'll leave it at that. So had a big influence on my life, but in a really weird way. But the first 12 years of my life, she was a single mom, and she did not have a lot of education, but she's whip smart with ADD from hell, and she's a very strong person. So our relationship was interesting. My mom was one of those moms where there was not a lot of education, there was not a lot of, there was a lack of finances, and there was a lot of chaos, and yet I could talk to my mom about anything when she was there. Let me clarify, when she was there. She was very open, and she did defend me. And so I think that is why I turned out okay.
Now, is she a good listener? Because many ADD males or females, they're terrible listeners. Because they always have to say that thing on their mind rather than
when
really
she knew something was critical. She had to know it was like, you had to be able to get her to listen, and she had to know it was really important. And because she was so focused on her problems that it was often hard to do that. And I was a quiet kid. So
You really?
I was really quiet. I was really timid until I had been through a couple of really hard times, like being molested. We're talking about teenage years. So being molested and then being attacked on the street walking to high school when I was 15. Those 2 events brought me out of my shell and really solidified in my mind that I had to learn how to fight. And so I had to learn how to speak up and fight and be assertive.
I don't think I've ever seen you go.
Yeah, you won't anymore. you probably never will again. I really learned how to be assertive after that. And because initially I became angry, and then I learned how to become assertive. But I didn't speak up very easily when I was young. And so there was this, and I didn't know that I was actually kind of down as a teenager. I was actually probably down a lot, but I still functioned. I went to school. I don't know what depression was.
I think looking back on it, you got depressed. And one of the reasons you got depressed is you were very popular at the high school.
As a cheerleader, and right.
And you were connected to a good group. Mm-hmm. And then when your mom moved, and many people with ADD moved 4 times.
Just before my junior year.
More than other people. And if you move then, it's the worst time to move, that you were unplugged.
Right. And it was really hard.
And given how pretty you were and how well developed you are, which most people don't know, everybody goes, "Oh, well, that's really a great thing."
No.
But it's a nightmare.
It's a really hard thing
for girls.
It was
Because
way too
they
much
become
attention too young.
objectified.
Well, it was way too much attention, way too young, and I didn't know how to handle it. And so there's that. So that was a little bit about my youth. I think and that you can sort of see that, and that was a big part of sort of the issues with the stepdads and just issues that I dealt with in school and some of that. And so I became introverted. Yet if you pushed me, like I sort of developed this attitude: you push me against a wall, I'm going to knock your teeth in. Like it was like, I'll stay out of your way, you stay out of mine. But if you push me against a wall, I'm going to metaphorically knock your teeth in. Like it was just.
Well, now with the second degree black belt, there's no metaphorically about it.
Yeah, that's true.
So for the people listening, what's really important, and I have a question for you. What's really important is you remember, if you're raising teenagers, you need to spend some time and reflect on what it was like for you as a teenager. Because what happens is whenever you have a child, whatever age that child is, unconsciously, you actually go back to that period of time in your mind and you're reliving those years in your own head. And so sometimes your reactions are not of a 45-year-old mom or a 55-year-old dad. It's of you reacting as if you're
I just had a huge
15.
light bulb moment. That's so funny that you just said that.
Would you like
Huge
to
light
share?
bulb moment. Yeah, because we have this 15 and a half year old teenager who, by any standard, is just freaking amazing, right? She's 4.0. She's on student leadership at church. She's like doing community service. She's ridiculously, most people would just like die to have a kid that's this easy. But she's 15. And so she's developing her, and here's the grind. Here's the rub. We raised her to be very strong, very independent, to think for herself. But now she's actually doing it. That's not easy. Like suddenly she's doing it. And the last 3 years, she's basically spent like almost all of her time like connected to me. And she's listened to like almost everything I say because she's just not one to sort of reject what I have to say just because through her teen years. And so she's always sought my advice. And now all of a sudden she's like, I've sought your advice. Now I'm going to make my own decisions. And I'm like, whoa, no, stop. Like, I'm not ready for you to do this, even though her decisions aren't bad decisions. But it's just all of a sudden it's freaking me out. And I don't know why it's freaking me out. And you just sort of, I had that light bulb moment when you said that. It's because at that age, that was the hardest time in my life. And I wish I could go back sometimes and do it differently. And so that was just a massive light bulb moment for me.
And so because you wish you could go back and do it
I'm
differently.
so scared she's going to do.
Are you putting more pressure on her to do it differently for you?
I might be. I didn't think I was, but I might be.
So it's not conscious. And what a lot of people don't know is half of their behavior is either automatic or fueled from the past.
Yeah, no, and I even think to myself, why am I frustrated right now? She's doing what she's supposed to do. I know logically she's doing what she is supposed to do.
Before we have to stop this session, and maybe this is a question for the next session, how much of your adolescence should you tell her? Many.
Well, I probably don't follow the rules on this.
So many parents lie.
Yeah, I don't.
To their children. They make it seem like they were perfect.
I do not do that.
Teenagers, when in fact they were not so perfect.
I don't do that intentionally.
Teenagers.
I don't do it intentionally.
So how much do you tell them about the sex? Do you tell them about the alcohol? Do you tell them about the pot because or do you lie to them because you want them to be perfect like you were not perfect?
So do you want me to actually answer this, or are we going to the next podcast?
Stay with us.
Okay.
When we come back, we're going to talk about how much to share and how much should you not overshare. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are in Teen Week, both sitting here completely traumatized by our
Yes.
own teenage years. And we stopped the last podcast with this one question: how much should you share about your own reality as an adolescent? But before we get that, you have a review you're going to read.
This is from Nutrition Tactics to Supercharge Your Brain. This is by IN Health Coach from the US. And it says, as you say, what I am doing, is this going to help my brain or is it going to hurt my brain? I am so protective of my brain and how to care for it. I'm learning from you every day, from your podcast, books, and recipes. You are game-changing for my life and my family and friends around me. I am a graduate of the Institute of Integrative Nutrition and the Gut Health course. I am passionate to help and change the lives of the people I love and those around me. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you so much for that.
I know. We're getting like 50,000 downloads every week. We are so grateful
Yes,
to
we are
all
grateful.
of
Thanks
you.
for sharing.
And, we try to bring you topics that matter in your life. Last week we did Mom Week. This week we're doing Teen Week. So what do you think about sharing?
So I'm going to start with a question that someone asked us, okay? Because I think that I'm going to give you my opinion, but we all have different opinions. I'm not sure there's a rule on this. I mean, you as a child psychiatrist probably know that better than I do. Here's a question from one of our listeners. What's the matter with asking my teenager a simple question? I'd like to know. Why is she so unwelcoming when I do? So I have a theory, and you're going to have a scientific theory. This is just my mom theory. It might be because they think you don't understand. That's my guess. Because most of my friends actually think I overshare with my daughter. Now, I've made it age appropriate. I've not overshared my teenage years when she was 10. Okay, I didn't do that. But at each stage, when I know that she's struggling with something, number one, we have a rule in our house, and we just had this discussion last night with her again. We want to hear all of your thoughts. Everything is safe for you to discuss. But then you actually have to make it safe, right? So one of the things we do at the dinner table, her friends have actually kind of freaked out when they come over for dinner because they're like, your family's so weird because we talk about everything. And the way we get them to talk or her to talk is by us sharing. So I share with my daughter things about my teenage years and my childhood, but I've done it at each stage that she's at. Now, I may not go into detail. It depends on the situation. It really depends on the topic and the situation. I may not go into explicit detail depending on what it is, but I share the struggle. I share the challenges. I share the successes. I share all of that, but I'm very clear with her. I'm like, I'm sharing this because a wise man learns from his own mistakes. A wiser man learns from someone else's, right? I'm not saying that I was smart. You are smarter than I am in a lot of ways. So, but that's my way of handling it. And because of that, she's incredibly open with us because I've made it safe.
Which is what you want them to do because, if you are like this person, what's the matter with asking my teenager a simple question? I'd like to know, why is she so unwelcoming when I do? Whenever I read that, the quality of their relationship is poor. And often it's because mom is not a good listener because her mother was not a good listener. And if she's talking over the teenager, then the teenager is not going to share. The teenager is just going to be in fight mode, right? If you are not sure someone's safe, that someone is not being harsh or critical or demeaning, then, what do they say in karate, right? You're always assessing the situation. And is this safe?
Right.
Or is it dangerous?
Right.
And because who can hurt you more than anybody? It's your wife or your husband or your parents.
Right.
And so my first thought is the quality of their relationship is not good because they've not perhaps spent enough time together and there's not been enough listening. because when there's enough listening, if you ask a simple question, and the person feels like you're really interested in the answer, or and not expecting the answer that you want, that you demand, then they're going to give you a bad attitude.
Right. So I want to say, because you also share, and I don't know what you're going to say your philosophy is, but you share a lot, to the point that my daughter, between the two of us, she walks out with her hands over it. Stop. So she's like, and we don't even share like stuff that's like bad. She's like, no one needs to hear this from their parents. And so, but here's an interesting point. You asked me in the last episode if my mom was a good listener. She wasn't always a good listener, but here's what she did do. She always, like, possibly overshared. So
Your mother completely
she overshares. But what that did is she would even come in my room. She one thing she did do was remember what it was like to be a teenager. She was really good at that. And so she would come in my room at times when I really wasn't even thinking about talking to her about something. She'd anticipate the next step. She anticipated what I was going through. She'd come in, and so I'd be 15. She'd come in and she'd want to have like a serious like sex talk, and she'd want to talk about birth control. And I'm not even there. I'm not even there yet. But her point was she was going to anticipate it. So she didn't listen. She didn't even ask. She jumped in, and I'm like, get out of my room. I'm yelling at her to get out of my room. I don't want to hear it because it's like freaking me out. But
she was doing the right thing.
Right. Listen to me. That's what I was going to get at. I'm mad at her, sort of mad at her for like freaking me out and like trying to like talk to me about birth control when I'm like, I'm not even there yet. But here's what it did. It opened a door.
Right. And I think when kids are 12, you should be talking to them about sex and drugs.
Well, she did that, but now she was serious about...
Actually, did I tell you this? 1987, the very first video I ever created was called An Intimate Parent-Child Talk. It was about how to talk to your kids about sex and drugs. Neither of my parents did. When I talked to my mother about sex, she'd just get horrified and turn green, even though she has 7 children. So I know she knew something about it. But, there was no information coming there, certainly not from my dad because he wasn't home. And so kids then
learn from their friends.
Learn bad information or erroneous information. And I think sharing, I love what you said, age appropriate. So you're not sharing vivid details with 7-year-olds. But as they get older, talking about how it works, some of your experiences.
Some of my mistakes.
And what you would do differently.
Right. It's important.
And
that's how they learn.
If you just lie to them like you were the perfect parent, you were the perfect teen, and they know, well, that there's no way that was possible.
Or they think, well, then she's never going to understand what I'm going through.
Right.
So
remembering what it was like, appropriately sharing, but also sharing the lessons, not at a time when they can't hear you. And that's why you do things with kids, with children and teenagers. So I take a lot of, when I do therapy with a teenager, we'll often go for a long walk.
Right.
Why?
Drives
because
are great.
if we're just sitting across from each other in my office, it's not a natural situation.
Right.
And so, and parents, they get so mad because they think I'm paying all this money for the child to go play cards with Dr. Amen.
Right.
And we just use the cards as a distraction.
Yep.
So
we go for drives. And when I take Chloe for a drive, she not only opens up, if I take her and her friends for a drive, I know everything going on at school. It's the craziest thing. They just suddenly, and I'm like, I literally turned around to one of her friends one time. I'm like, do you talk to your mom about this? She's like, no way. And I'm like, well, it's the weirdest thing. They just open up. But I want to just reiterate, sometimes, because that question that we started with, sometimes kids will act mad at you or be mad at you for bringing something up that's embarrassing to them. They will...
But do it at an appropriate time that doesn't embarrass them.
But even though I was like, I don't want to talk to you about this, go away. Like, this isn't like this is freaking me out that you came in my room talking to me about birth control and I'm not even like ready to like have that talk yet. I freaked out at her in the moment. But it planted a seed with me that, oh, it's safe to talk to my mom when I am ready. That's what it did. And she knew that. Somehow my mom just knew that, okay, well, it's like a hit and run. I'm going to plant that information. I'm going to take off. Because like now she knows, I know, and she knows that she can talk
And
to
they're
me.
more likely to listen to you if you listen to them.
Right.
Another question we have is, what impact does a parent's mental illness have on a child?
Oh, that's hard.
And it's a lot.
Yeah.
Because
Get it
my uncle, who was a priest, then turned therapist, said something I really liked. He said, children are like violins. They play the stress of their parents with their behavior.
That's interesting.
And it's so important. And you know how I got most of my adult patients is they'd bring me their kids. And during the evaluation, pretty quickly, I got smart enough to go, oh, as I evaluate the children, let me evaluate mom and dad too. Because, you know, if I treat a child and I send them home to a mom who has ADD that can't concentrate, or a dad who's bipolar, who's completely unpredictable, that's not going to be good for the child. So, you know, here at Amen Clinics, we're family psychiatrists for the most part. But having a mom that's depressed, or a dad that's angry, or inattentive, or, you know, psychotic. My son-in-law grew up in a family with a mother that had paranoid schizophrenia. That really does a number on your own development, your own sanity. And gratefully, he sort of worked through that in therapy for a long time. But it's so important for you to take care of your own mental health so that the children don't feel responsible.
Yeah, no, it's part of why I did 2 years of therapy when Chloe was little. It's when I realized that I was beginning to repeat, even though I wasn't repeating the same pattern from my childhood, I'd actually become very defensive about my childhood pattern and the chaos in my house. But even that defensiveness was, in its own way, a problem. And I just realized that I was developing habits that I'm like, I don't want to be this kind of mom. And that's why I went to 2 years of therapy. I really didn't want to like pass on those same habits. So
stay with us. More from Teen Week when we come back.
welcome back. We are still in Teen Week, and today we're going to talk about what's normal and when should you get your teen help. So
But before we do, let's go to another one of the reviews. Thank you so much, Hannah Raoul. I can watch and listen again and again. It's so helpful and important. Great. Thanks. I love it too. Well, we love you back. Thank you so much. Normal. So this is actually going to surprise people because kids act badly and they go, oh, he's just a teenager. That's normal. Well, that's not normal. They actually did a study out of Chicago a long time ago looking at 10,000 teenagers. A third of them never had any problems, pretty much like Chloe. She's consistent, hardworking, loving. Now, she can be anxious and worried, but she doesn't, you know, we're not constantly thinking about teenage therapy.
No, there's no drugs, alcohol, like that kind of stuff.
We scanned her, but you know, we do that because she's in our family.
She wanted to see her brain. She actually wanted to see it.
So a third of teenagers, they never have problems. Another third of teenagers, every once in a while, they would have problems. And then another third, they had problems all the time. So if your teenager is really struggling most of the time, that's a sign you need to get them help.
Right.
And did you know that when a child or a teen first has their first symptoms of trouble, it's on average 11 years before they see their first therapist.
Wow.
They are suffering for more than a decade before they actually get help. I'm not okay with
Wow.
that. That's why in our high school course, we have a high school course, hopefully you know about, called Brain Thrive by 25. You can learn more about it at brainthriveby25.com. We actually have a module in the course on brain health, mental health issues like ADD, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder. And you just can't believe the number of stories we get. After we taught it, there was a girl that came up to us after class and she's just crying. And she goes, I never had a name for it, but because I have PTSD. I'm like, oh, sweetheart, what happened? She said, I was babysitting my little brother when I was 7, and he got away from me and ended up drowning. And I have nightmares
7?
watching her little brother at 7. And she said, I have nightmares and I'm racked with guilt and I see his dead body over and over
God.
again. It's horrifying. And we said there's help for it. And we connected her up with an EMDR therapist to help her work through the trauma. But there's so many kids who are struggling
Wow.
with a mental health issue and nobody knows.
So let's talk for a second because so Chloe comes up to me about a week ago and this is really funny. It's actually a funny story. So because we're so open with her, because it's safe to say things in our house, she'll say things I think that a lot of teenagers aren't willing to tell their parents. And it's actually a very funny conversation. So she was sort of pulling back on something that I was trying to talk to her about, and she was disagreeing with me, and I said, I talked to her about it, and she said to me, here's what she said. She goes, I don't know what's wrong with me. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, there's just something wrong with this. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me lately, but the last couple months, she goes, I all of a sudden feel myself wanting to say no to you for no apparent reason. She's like, I don't even know why. I just want to say no. And I have this question in my head. She's being very honest. And she goes, and I'm trying not to laugh out loud. And she's like, and I have this thought in my head, like, well, how do you know what's best for me? And like, how do you know everything for me? And so, and I could have reacted and just gotten mad at her. But because I'm armed with information, right? Because it's easy to be reactive in that moment and bristle and go, yeah, why are you doing that? But being armed with information, like childhood development information, I sat back, I let her finish. And I said, do you actually want to know the answer to that? And she said, yes. It's like frustrating. She goes, I know my life is easier if I just do what you say, but I don't want to all the time. And she's like, and that's not really like me. And I go, well, that's funny that you say that because I know the reason why. And she said, why? I go, I don't want to minimize it by saying it's because you're 15. But what it really is because it's childhood development. And at 15, your 2 tasks are to become independent and figure out who the heck you want to be. And
Separate.
Right. I said, you're now figuring out I'm not the hero of your entire life. You may look up to me, you may respect me, but you're starting to want to take charge of your own life.
Yeah, it's so irritating.
And that's normal,
when they're
though.
15, they begin to see all of your flaws. And then they point them out
Yes.
on a routine basis. And then when their brain's done, they are back to, you're amazing.
Right.
And they can hold the fact that you're not perfect.
Right.
With the
they're not
fact
perfect.
that you're amazing. And your relationship can go back to being more normal. So I often tell parents, we just got to get them to 25.
Right.
Let's just keep them safe until
Once they get
they're
out of
25.
college. Right. But my point with that was this. Many people see that as teenagers are being rebellious, they're irritating, they're whatever. And it is irritating. But that part of it is normal. So how do you sort of differentiate that normalness from the problem child? Like, I know that that's normal.
Well, what I want to do before we're over with this podcast is talk about when to know when they need help.
Right, but
So
part of it is knowing normal from not normal.
So, yes. So know that chronic trouble is not normal for teenagers. That's a sign of trouble. So if you find 6 or 7 or 8, 9, 10 days out of 10, you're struggling with them. Something's going on either with you or with them. And so getting assessed is
But
important.
what kind of struggling are we talking about? Problems in
I'm
school?
going to talk about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Listen. Any form of self-harm,
Okay.
cutting, talking of suicide, suicidal gestures, having their friends tell you that they told them about suicide. That's a 911 emergency call that they need to be assessed immediately. And cutting is actually very common. Substance abuse, marijuana use is common, but it's not good for them. I had that conversation earlier this week with one of my friends, 14-year-old starting to smoke pot. Pot increases the risk of psychosis 450%.
But so many,
I don't care if everybody's
Right.
doing it.
So many parents think it's
because
normal.
it's not good for them and it's damaging a developing brain. Sadness. Now, not that sadness is there for an hour.
Transient,
But
right.
sadness that's just like it's been a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
So persistent.
Irritability that, they're snapping. They're more negative than they use. High highs and low lows. You have to be concerned about kids having panic attacks. There's treatment for that, and it's important to get, because if you don't, they begin to start avoiding friends, sports, classes, and so on. If they're chronically fatigued, if their sleep cycle really begins to change, those are some symptoms that something may be going on in their brain. More common after head injuries. They're more common during when parents are getting divorced, which has been very common the last 3 decades, right? If they're struggling in school, it's important to assess why. There's actually a brand new SPEC study out this morning on learning disabilities from China. And SPEC, you could see the differences on scans, which I've known for a long time. So those are some of the things. We love helping children and teenagers here at Amen.
Because they're amazing even when they're struggling, when they start to figure it out and trust you and get help for themselves, and they don't feel that shame in being able to share it and get help. Teenagers are cool. They're amazing.
Well, I had an appointment earlier this week with this girl that was diagnosed with ADD. And I figured out she also had something called the Erlen syndrome, which is a visual processing problem. And we're actually going to have Helen Erlen on in a couple of weeks. We're really excited about that. But when she put on the glasses, she actually saw her mother's full face for the first time.
Isn't that crazy? That's crazy.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
So when a child is struggling, notice it. Get them the help they need. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are in the middle, toward the end of Teen Week, and another review from Sandra McNeil, Tana, on your YouTube channel. I absolutely love your work, supporting the mind, body, and spirit. The world is a better place because of you. Thank you both for everything you do. Well, you are welcome. So we asked our viewers, our listeners, and we're asking you again, when you have questions, send them in to us.
Yeah.
We're going to actually begin to take one of the weekly podcasts and dedicate it to the questions people have. Mm-hmm. And we have some questions on Teen Week.
Right.
And one of them is, how do you get a resistant teen to therapy? Mm-hmm. So do you want to answer that one?
Well, no, I think you should answer it, because I'm just going to give a comment, because I'm not actually sure, but I do know that, just from my own experience, what I know, I had one teenager, my daughter, who would be resistant. She's resistant to therapy, because she just has this idea, even though, and maybe because she lives with us and feels like she doesn't need to do it, but also she has this idea that it means somehow there's something wrong. And that for her in her little perfectionistic brain is hard. But my niece, our niece that we have, she thrives on therapy because she feels like, oh, I have some place to go where I can like let it all out and there's help. So I think it depends on the kid. Yeah, some kids are very resistant, and I don't know how you would suggest that kids really how you identify the difference and help the ones that are resistant, because kids like Chloe are more resistant.
It's critical. This is medical care. I mean, I know people don't think of mental health care as medical care, but it absolutely is medical care. And if he was a diabetic, the parents wouldn't allow that to be optional. If he had cancer, they wouldn't allow the care to be optional. And I'm sorry, these are brain health issues, and that's just as important. And I don't think you should allow it to be optional.
But is
Now,
there a
you
way
can't
you can
force
rephrase it?
them to get a
Engage.
scan.
Well, you also can't force them to engage once they're there.
No, but we are trained. I can't tell you the number of children, that teenagers and children that have said, I'm not going to see a psychiatrist. I'm not crazy. You can't make me. I'm not going to talk. Don't waste your money. And the parent says all of that to me up front. And I nod my head and I said, yes, I know it's hard. Leave him with me. And for like, out of the thousands of children I've seen over the last 30 years, I think I've had 2 that actually went the whole session without saying anything.
Really?
And one of them, he started with, why are you wasting my parents' money? And then put, of course, it was an Oakland Raiders hat and jacket, put it over his head. And all my efforts to engage were for naught. And his behavior was so bad. Was just very clear with him at the end of the second session. I'm like, I understand you don't want my help. Your behavior worries your parents, and your behavior worries me. You have a choice. You're going to let me scan you and find out what's going on, or I'm going to recommend, and your parents have already found a place for you, that I'm going to recommend a hospital where you go stay for a couple of months. I don't care. It's up to you. And he took off his hat and he said, I don't want to go away. What do you want me to do? And we scanned him. But there was a commotion in the scan room because, he's oppositional speak. And so I walked back there. I'm like, what? He said, I'm not doing the scan. And I'm like, I've been a child psychiatrist a long time now. I'm like, what'll it take? He said, $20. And so I handed him $20. And he put his arm out, got the scan. And I said, I'm going to hang around. And we're going to look at it together. And so I got the scan. I looked at it. His frontal lobes were on fire. Worried, rigid, inflexible. Things don't go his way. I mean, oppositional from hell. And so I explained it to him. And then he looked at me, and now we're having a conversation. And he said, can you help me?
Oh.
I said, for $20.
For $20.
I said, for $20. Give me my $20 back.
That's hilarious.
And I put him on some medicine that calmed down his frontal lobes, and he ended up in medical school.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, how do you know unless you look
So
what's
you said
going
something
on
super important.
in his brain?
But you said something really important. Because a lot of parents just struggle with this idea that their kids are not going to engage. They're going to be difficult. They don't know what to do. You said the most important thing that I heard out of this conversation was, we're trained for that. So just get them here.
Get them here.
Right.
Get them to a therapist. All kids start with that, and it's not their fault. It's mental health, mental illness, being deranged, being crazy, being stigmatized. My profession's done that to people because we've made it a brainless profession. If people go, oh, I'm going to go have a better brain and a better life, well, who doesn't really want to do that? But if you think you're going to go and you're going to get a diagnosis, oh, I'm ADHD or I'm oppositional or I have a conduct disorder, or I'm bipolar.
Or I can't be helped.
And nobody wants that. And that's the whole issue. We're going to talk about it forever, but coming up this year, we're going to talk about the end of mental illness because I'm done with it. We need to start calling these things what they really are, which is brain issues that steal your mind.
I want to end with this. Are my teens' struggles normal?
Well, we sort of talked about that in the last podcast. If their behavior is interfering, so this is how the short answer. If your behavior, your teenager's behavior or feelings or thinking is interfering with their ability to do school, if it's interfering with their ability to work, if it's interfering with their ability to be in relationship in the family, if it's interfering with their ability to feel good about themselves, that's when you know they need help.
But they are going through massive hormonal changes, brain pruning, sleep circadian rhythm cycle changes. There's a lot going on even in a normal situation. So you just have to be able to differentiate the two.
Well, when their behavior, when their feelings, when their thinking is off and it's interfering with their ability to be successful in their life, that's when I would pull the trigger. I mean, ultimately, I would want everybody to want a better brain because, for Chloe, none of those things are true, right? Mm-hmm. She has good relationships. She's doing great in school. She's volunteering. But her scan was so important.
To her.
Right. And
to me.
When you develop a relationship with your brain, you want a better brain, and that gets you a better life.
Can I end with one little story about why it's important? So Chloe has sort of an anxious brain. She's like very active, and mine is different than hers, right? So my frontal lobes are a little bit sleepy. And so when I want to prepare for something, I dive in, like I'm intense about it. Like I'm super intense. I over prepare. I do all this stuff. And when she needs to prepare for something, if she does that, she'll work herself into a complete frenzy, flip out, become anxious, and she can't focus. She shuts down. So she's got this big test coming up, and I immediately went into my mode of, here, honey, here's a plan. And I gave her this big outline. Today you need to do this. We're going to do this 3-hour practice test. And we're going to cancel everything we have going. And literally I saw her eyes get really big and she started to freak out. And she's I saw her she started shutting down. And then I stopped and I went, okay, what do you think you need to do? It was the exact opposite. She goes, I need to trust that I already know it.
Right.
I need to spend a few minutes reviewing practice questions and I need to let it go. And you know what?
Which is the best advice
and
for her.
I stopped and I went, you're absolutely right. You're 15 and a half. You know yourself. We've already been through this. And I had to trust that. But it's because I've seen her scan. And I've been down this road with her. And I just went, she's not me.
She's not you. One of the big lessons from Teen Week. She's not you. Stay with us. If you're interested in coming to the Amen Clinics, use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation. Visit amenclinics.com.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode.